All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Britt Myers, today's host for the Lasting Mission podcast, where our goal is to connect, educate, inform, and empower our veterans and their military families. So we're so excited to have Austin Carrigg here as today's guest. We featured her and her family story, a brief part of it, in April for a month of the military child. So for those who might not have been able to read that story or who know of you personally, Austin, and the work that you're having and impact you're having, I'm just excited to get to introduce you to our audience today. So thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a lot of fun to be able to join you on this because it feels like we run into you everywhere. And so we get to sit down and talk finally. So this is great.
I know. I feel like I'm everywhere you are, and I promise it's coincidental. I'm not stop. I am a fan, though, so it wouldn't be too surprising. I think it'd be great if we could just start with a little more about you, how you came to be part of the military community, and maybe how you got involved in advocacy, especially for military families and exceptional families of the military.
Yeah, so I was raised by my grandparents, and my grandfather was retired Air Force, and my father was in the Air Force. And I feel like every generation prior to that, somebody was in the Air Force. And then I went and married my high school sweetheart who joined the Army. And that was only a little bit of a disappointment. So he joined the Army right before we got married. So he went to basic training. He came home and we got married. And, that's how military life is. Fast forward several years, like more than half of our marriage later, and we have this beautiful little girl that seems like the whole world knows about. But we were struggling to get her the care she needed. And there were a lot of rules and regulations that were getting ready to change with the ACA and Medicaid, block grants, and all of these things. So we jumped into advocacy there. And we worked with an organization called Little Lobbyists on really stopping that repeal of the ACA at the time because it wouldn't block grant and Medicaid. And for those listening who don't know what block grants are, they sound like a great thing in theory, but in practice, when you're living with Medicaid, not always a great thing. So we were really happy when that didn't happen. And then I woke up the next day and thought, okay, we won this. Now what? What do I do? I won this battle. We've been fighting now for a long time, and now we need to find a new reason. And we decided to transition into working on Tricare issues because that was the other pain in our life. And so transitioned into there, and I jumped in the Tricare for Kids Coalition. And then next thing I know, I was asked to testify before Congress on the Exceptional Family Member Program. And it was a little daunting.
Yes.
I put off writing my testimony until literally the night before it was due because it was so daunting, but I did it. And we got it turned in, and I testified, and I woke up the next morning to thousands of messages across my social media accounts, and it was, your story is like mine. Oh my gosh, I want to help. What can I do? Are people saying, please help me? I'm underwater and I don't know where to turn. And so that's where Exceptional Families in the Military came from.
Well, I know a lot's happened in between those pauses that you were giving. It's hard to summarize it all in just a few minutes. And Melanie is who we featured in April for those that caught that story. And she's just one part of your family. You have two other kids who are doing amazing things as well. But if you can share a little bit more about her specifically and sort of what those early days looked like and how you kind of started to fall into that advocacy lane, fighting for her.
Yeah, so she is 12 years old now. We have a cute little preteen who tells us no constantly until you do you. But before, she was sassy and when she liked to hang out with mom. We brought her home when she was 6 weeks old. So Melanie's adopted. We adopted her from Hawaii. And so I flew from Hawaii back to Boston where we were stationed. And those first few weeks were really hard. We knew that she had a heart defect, but we were told by her cardiologist in Hawaii that she could wait till she was 9 months old and have a laparoscopic heart surgery. And I'm like, check the box. This is going to be so easy. I'll just do this laparoscopic surgery. We knew she had Down syndrome. We're like, that's fine. Down syndrome, that's not a big deal. I've got this. And then it was like, oh, and she's also deaf. And I'm like, okay, well, I naively thought like, I'll just slap some cochlear implants on there. Everything is going to be fixed. This is going to be easy. And then we're just going to have a kiddo who has Down syndrome. I was so wrong. And right after her open heart surgery, my husband was on orders to go to JBLM. And that is what the testimony was about. They told us to give her back and get a new one when we got there because the hospital said that she couldn't be discharged it wasn't safe, that she needed to stay in the hospital a little bit longer. And yeah, that's what HRC came down and said. They're like, let's give her back like she was a puppy and get a new out there, because she's adopted, right? So it's not like we gave birth to her, so like we can just return to send her. Obviously that didn't happen, and I did have to discharge her against medical advice to go across the country. And her and one of our other kids were actually so sick at the time that we couldn't even fly. It was deemed too dangerous to fly. So me and my youngest son and a friend of ours took Amtrak for 6 days across the country from Boston to Washington State, because that was the only way that we could safely get the children from one place to the other. And the military paid for it. I will give them that. Bridge the train, because we could not fly, because she was on oxygen and he was in a really rough place. And if either one of them stopped breathing, they didn't think the plane would land in time to survive.
Oh my gosh, I did not know that part of your story.
Yeah, 6 days in a train, and I had a baby that had only been home with me for a couple of days, who, just had open heart surgery. It was a lot. We didn't know what we were doing. At one point, we ran out of oxygen, and I didn't know that the tank had been out of oxygen because I put a new one on. I didn't even know that they could be bad when you put a new one on, and the alarms are going off on all of her machines, and like people are trying to help and they're stopping the train. And I just needed a new oxygen tank. And it was very clear in that moment that, like, I should not have been on a train with this child. We were trying to do what the military wanted us to do. And we all survived. And we got to JBLM, and it was a fight there too. And we got there, and they told us, you shouldn't be here. We don't have the medical care that she needs. And we're like, but you just told the military to bring us here. And they're like, well, we have to say that, because if we say no, it makes us look bad and we lose some of our funding. And so we fought for another 2.5 years to get out of JBLM, where they knew they didn't have medical care available. And we got to Washington, D.C. Things were good until they weren't. And then, as they always do. And then at JBLM, she had a cochlear implant placed. At Walter Reed, they placed a second one. We had to fight to get the second one placed, because they had told us that the $60,000 that the implant costs from the hospital budget could be better justified for a child who didn't have Down syndrome. And so we battled to get that second implant placed. And then moving forward, there was a point in time where she lost her ability to communicate. So she was speaking with spoken language, and she started stumbling, and our PT said, like, something is very, very wrong. I think it's neurological. There's nothing else it could be. See neurology. And neurology convinced me that it was just the normal up and downs of the developmentally delayed child learning how to walk, and that I didn't need to worry about it. And he said, a good head MRI would put to rest any concerns, but he never ordered the MRI. And so we just went along with our life every day and just thought, he must be right. And then I testified, and within 2 months, my husband was on orders to UCLA in the middle of COVID. And our doctors, again, said, like, this is not safe. We had to get a lot of memorandums. We had to fly. My husband flew with us, and it was basically like quarantine this child. Like, there's no tomorrow. This was before vaccines. And we made it, and it took us 6 months to get medical care. And then by the time she got seen by neurology, so I guess I skipped that part, she had a seizure the night before the movers packed our last load. So they packed us. After they packed us that night, she had a seizure, and she ended up in the hospital. Again, they told us not to move. We called the EFMP, and they told us, celebrities live in LA, just go. We were PCS'd on a care not available nominative. The Office of the Surgeon General had to override it to send us anyway. And took us 6 months to get into neurology, to get ENT to take those cochlear implants out, to do an MRI. And the day of the MRI, they told us she has moyamoya disease. She'd had strokes in the past. So when she lost her language and started stumbling the years before, if we'd done an MRI, she would have been much safer, but they didn't. And the next day, she had a catastrophic stroke that paralyzed the entire right side of her body. There were a lot of moments where we thought we were going to lose her. So it was during COVID. My husband couldn't be at the hospital. She went in for a same-day procedure and never left. And they called us in, and they said, this is going to go one of 3 ways. She's either going to continue to stroke for the remainder of the night, and you lose her. We get a couple of days to give her brain time to heal from the stroke, and we fix what we can. or you get a couple of months, but only time will tell. And a few days later, they're like, we have to do it now. And so they took her in for a 21-hour brain surgery. They had to take out her cochlear implants again because the surgeon put them in and didn't put them in the right place. So when she had the MRI done those days before, where they found the moya was they were taking out the non-MRI compatible cochlear implants and they were putting them in. But he didn't put them in the cochlea. So he had to go back in and do a revision and actually put them in the cochlea, which is how the sound gets there. And we sat at an Airbnb across the street because my husband and my boys could not be at the hospital because the hospital waiting room closes at a certain point in time. I think it was 8 o'clock, and she was in surgery well past that. And they wouldn't let them say goodbye. So the morning of the surgery, anesthesia told me, I don't think I'm going to bring her out. Like, say goodbye because this is it. We don't think she's probably going to come out. And they told us that my husband and her brothers couldn't come say goodbye because of COVID, and that if she were imminently dying on the operating room table, then the hospital president could make an exception, but it would be up to them. And so we sat at their Airbnb because we wanted them to be close enough that if something happened, they could say goodbye. And we're really lucky. Nothing did. And eventually got to the point where there was nothing more they could do. And so they air ambulanced her from UCLA to Boston. And we were there for several months where, again, the Army was like, sorry, we can't give you a compassionate reassignment. Your EFMP packets for the rest of the family are expired. You need to get them redone before we can give you orders. The EFMP packets we'd just done less than 9 months prior. And we reached out to a friend in the media, and we had been following through with the congressional office. So we reached out to them again and said, look, they're not going to let us out of here. Like, they're telling us to take her home, but UCLA's already said there's nothing they can do. So we fought even harder to get her back to DC. And then we got back here. And in those moments that she was in the hospital, I was trying to decide what I was going to do with the nonprofit. We'd started paperwork to start a nonprofit after the hearing. And I just remember looking at her one day, thinking to myself, like, this all has to be for a reason. And I'm going to promise you that whether you survive or not, this is going to be your legacy. This organization is going to be what gets us through, and so that nobody else ever has to go through the things that you've had to go through. And so she got better, and that meant she got to do it with me. And so side by side, we've walked into Congress and we've had a lot of Zoom calls. We're just trying to make people aware of all of the things that families like ours face and ask people to help us make a change.
Oh, I mean, I've heard your story before, so you would think I'd be able to sit with that a little better, but every time it just hits so hard, and I'm a little mad at you for not bringing her into this podcast today, Austin, but next time we will have to meet Melanie. And she has one of my, as on a lighter note, one of my favorite stories. And I'm sure for you at the time it was not very funny, but when she went to therapy and she was just not feeling it, did not want to be doing therapy. And because she's deaf, she would just lay on the floor and close her eyes.
Close her eyes for that hour. She now has home hostel instruction teachers, so her teachers come to our house to teach her instead of her going to school. Yes, the little head goes down and the eyes close. And she's just, okay. And so we all just sit here and wait for her to open them again. And then she will peek, like, are you still looking? And then she goes back along her little journey, and next thing you know, they're closed again. And, it does not help that she's a preteen now. So it was super cute, Britt, when she was little, and it's still cute now, except it's done with a lot more attitude.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, and does she still have an obsession with her cat and like filming everything?
Yep. So she actually has a broken leg right now, but before she broke her leg, I took her to the park. And she's like, okay, record this, record this, record this, record this. And it was packed. It was one of those days that was amazing. And so we recorded all the things. I'm like, okay, now let's go play. She's like, no, we can go home now. We recorded everything. And I'm like sitting there. I'm like, we cannot. Everybody is watching. They're going to think I brought you here just to record for social media. And we don't even post it on social media. But I'm like, you have to go swing. You have to do something. We cannot leave right now. So yes. Every moment of our life is being recorded. You never know what's going to happen. The good news for anybody who knows this is they know that those don't go online. But I find video of myself like, oh, I was getting changed. And I walked by and there's recording because she records. And yeah, her cat, she's like, come here. And like now she like dances the cat. And you would think this is cruel, except the cat comes to her like and willingly allows her to do it. She's like, "Come here, Sophie." And Sophie's like, "Yeah, great. Like, oh, we're putting on a hat. Sounds good." It is. It's adorable.
I love it. I can't wait to see a future feature film she's coming up with. Like there's gonna be some sort of something coming out from Melanie. And we had talked earlier about your other two sons, but just briefly. And I think that was a cool part too, is that you guys have faced so much adversity and had so much thrown your way, but you've really made a lot from it. We'll get to obviously the nonprofit and how you're able to take your advocacy efforts and amplify those. But I thought it was really special to her older brother and their relationship. And I think he, at the time when you guys were at UCLA, was enrolled or maybe going to college in a different state, right? And he withdrew and came back. And then he now is a big part of advocating for her as well, correct?
He is. So he was at LSU, which is where everybody in my husband's family goes to college. So he went to LSU in the middle of COVID again and sat in those dorms by himself for online classes. And when she had her stroke, we were told we probably had 3 to 5 years. We are very, very lucky that that's changed. She's a little miracle. Our doctors are like, we don't know how this is possible, but it happened. And so we're taking it. But he, at the time, he was like, I want to spend the next 3 to 5 years, whatever time she has left, I want to be with her. I want to spend this time with her. And he came home unsure what to do. He was at a point in time where school was, towards the end of the year, he couldn't really apply to any colleges. And so we are really lucky. Congressman Trent Kelly really walked through the fire with us when all of this was going on. So he asked me to testify. And when everything went south, they were there by our side. And when we got back to DC, the congressman wants to meet with you as soon as you get here. And he asked how everybody was doing. And I told him about Christian. And he's like, he can have an internship. And what's funny up to that point is I had mentioned it to my son prior to this. He's like, I don't want to do what you do, Mom.
Too cool.
Right? Like, that's not my thing. And he was an engineering major. And so he's like, I don't want to do what you want to do. But when I'm like, look, if you take a year off, you take a gap year, you say you did a congressional internship or 2 or 3, then colleges are going to be like, oh, that's great. You were just like building character. And he did his first one and he loved it. And then he did 2 more and he said, you know what, I know what I'm doing. And he changed to a local college here in DC and he changed his major to political science. And he has been really every step of the way there with me with the nonprofit. If you see me at an event and my husband's not there, it's going to be my son. If somebody on my staff has legislative and policy questions because he was in offices, he's like, let me phone a friend. And he told us he wants to be able to change the world for people like his sister. And he realizes that most people don't understand that. And a couple years ago, he was actually named Young Adult Caregiver of the Year. So we're pretty proud of him. He's made a lot of big changes, but he's making a lot of positive impact. And we actually just started a young ambassador program. So we have a junior ambassador and a young adult ambassador program. And all the kids are like, where's he at? Where's he at? Bring him to the camera. So he's got his own little posse of kids that are in EFMP who are following behind him and just adore him. So we're really lucky.
That's so awesome. What a well-deserved honor for Christian too. And just putting his sister first, he came about it so humbly. But eventually mom's always right. You knew he was gonna fall for that. Once he got into DC, it was gonna be a good fit for him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I knew that this was in his future. He just didn't. Even in his senior year of high school, he wrote this essay to get to go to visit the Supreme Court. He beat everybody in all of DC to go to the Supreme Court on this essay on case law. And he was still like, no, I'm good.
It's like, I'm an engineer. You're like,
Yeah.
you can be that and.
Yes, exactly.
Well, okay, so we sort of bopped over this, and that's my doing. But for people who might not understand, what is the Exceptional Family Within the Military Program? What is EFMP?
So you have EFMP, which is the DoD's program, and then you have our nonprofit. So EFMP, the Exceptional Family Member Program, it's really if you have a special healthcare need, you have a special educational need, or you see specialists. So I think a lot of people are like, well, I don't have a disability, so I'm not EFMP. Yes, you probably are. Are you seeing an endocrinologist? Are you seeing a behavioral health provider? If you are, you should be enrolled in EFMP. Are you on medication for something? You should probably be in EFMP. But we know people avoid it. And so We created the nonprofit Exceptional Families in the Military. It sounds very similar to EFMP so that they could find us when they were searching online. And we encourage
So it's pretty easy.
And so we encourage everybody to enroll in EFMP. People tell me all the time it ruins your career. I would say that the service member has to try harder to make sure it doesn't, but it doesn't have to ruin your career. We've been EFMP my husband's entire career, and he recently made the highest enlisted rank you can get. So obviously that doesn't kill your career. It's how you navigate the barriers that are in front of you.
Yeah. I think that's just a really important message. And why do you think there are so many challenges or these misnomers maybe about the program itself? Is it because there's inherent challenges with it and that it's not very cut and dry and easy to navigate? Or what do you think from your side?
So I think it's because there are so many programs, right? Every branch has their own program. They are working on that through standardization, but it's a mess.
Mm.
It's also because in times before, that was the case. It would ruin your career. If you join and they're like, okay, well, you can't go anywhere, sorry, then what do you do? What are the other options? But the military is getting better. And look, I don't sing DoD praise very often. I will be the first one to say they made a mistake, but they are trying to fix this portion of it. Okay, how do we get the service member to be able to progress in their career and go to the next level? That's where I say you have to get creative sometimes. My husband's infantry, and he certainly has not had an infantry career, so to speak, right? We've been all over the place. My husband was in recruiting duty, but was not a recruiter. That's a tongue twister.
Yes.
So here we are in a recruiting duty station, and he's not a recruiter. And what do? How is it that you keep your career going? And it's finding opportunities to make yourself stand out from your peers. And so I think a lot of people don't look at it that way. They are like, oh, I'm stuck here. Now I'm stuck at this level. And it sometimes is really about you seeking the opportunities to do something different than what you've always been told is how your kind of career trajectory is supposed to look.
Mm-hmm. So how does your nonprofit work alongside that program, or maybe how do you help complement it or help other families navigate it, if that is how you operate?
That's exactly how it works. So our goal is to fill all the holes that the program leaves behind. So we help you figure out how to enroll because that can be very difficult for people. We offer peer-to-peer support. So we serve over 15,000 people in our peer-to-peer support groups. Sometimes things come across the peer-to-peer support groups that clearly are going to be a nightmare. We've all been in Facebook groups and different groups online. I think it's normally Facebook groups people think about. And you get really bad advice sometimes in those groups. So if we see a question that we know is going to get bad advice, we step in and we do direct one-on-one support. If somebody reaches out to us through our website, we're going to do the same thing, one-on-one support. Let's figure out the easiest answer to your problem. And then we've created programming. So we have family support, which is the peer-to-peer support. We have a grant program. So we just launched an EFMP grant. We give $30 to families for every specialty care appointment. So anything that's not OT, PT, ABA, or speech, because we know those are every week. If you need the grant for that because you can't go, we will give it to you. But we're really trying to make sure nobody's missing specialty care appointments or behavioral health appointments. We give you $30. We know you pay to park. We know you pay for gas. We know that sometimes you sit there for a really long time and the kids are screaming because they're hungry and people are going, if I feed them McDonald's or something else on the way home, I'm probably not going to be able to afford milk this week. We literally had people telling us they were choosing between a gallon of milk and a gallon of gas. Should never happen. And so we're going to give them $30 every time they have an appointment so they don't have to worry about that. You know what? Even if they're not hurting this week for money, we're still going to give you the $30 because it's an expense that your non-disabled peers don't have to have. And the reality is our paychecks are not meant to cover the amount of expenses that a lot of us have to go get medical care. So we have the grant program. We are working on a DME lending closet pilot. So we haven't launched it yet, but we all know that when you move, you can't take your medical bed with you and you can't take your bath chair and all of the other things that don't fit in your vehicle. So we want to be able to have medical closets set up so that people can borrow those until their household goods come in. So that's something we're working on. That's all under our family support. We research what we hear in family support. So if families are telling us they're struggling with food insecurity or copays, we do research to prove that what they're telling us is true. And then we take all of that together and we have legislative policies and DoD policies. And so we take the data and the stories to Congress and the DoD and we say, look, this is true. This isn't a one-off. This isn't we heard in the grapevine. Here's actual proof that this is what is happening. And here are stories from families that prove that it's true. and we work on policy changes. And so last year, one of our big wins was hearing aids for retiree children on Prime. Up to this point, hearing aids were not covered once you retired. And so now kids are still going to be able to hear. I know, right? You think to yourself, what do you mean? Like they're not going to magically hear when the service member retires, but they lost the benefit.
Yeah, and it's a substantial investment. It's not a little bit of money.
$10,000 per hearing aid.
Yeah, exactly. And like you're saying, if you're already having some of this financial stress while you're on active duty, let alone once you've retired, those things don't just go away.
Exactly.
Those are incredible accomplishments that you guys have had. What are some other key initiatives that you're maybe working on or that you're hearing from your community that might be a focus for you in 2025?
So we just launched our junior ambassador and young adult ambassador program. So our goal there is to give kids, no matter what abilities they have, a way to advocate. So we know that my Melanie is always by my side doing things. And so obviously we're teaching her how to advocate, but we had a little girl who is the daughter of one of our volunteers. Her name's Alyssa, and Alyssa would come to our meetings, all of our Zoom meetings with her notepad ready to take notes. And she came to, right, it's so cute. It's so cute. And she came to a meeting we had with a legislator and she's like whispers to her mom, but we can all hear it. Mom, can I tell him something? And the staffer was like, sure, what do you want to tell me? And she told him how hard it was being EFMP and being at home with her dad in Korea and how the kids at school were making fun of her.
Oh.
And he was really moved by like her advocating for herself and telling that story. So Alyssa is why our young adult and junior ambassador program exists, because we want to give kids the ability to speak for themselves in the ways they can. And for our kiddos who don't have a way to communicate, it's about normalizing our lives with disabilities. It's stop turning your eyes. You know how hurtful it is that their whole little lives, they were the cute little baby that everybody said hi to. And then one day you wake up and they're a preteen or they're a teenager and that child walks in the room and nobody looks at them. That is so hard. And I can tell you how hard that is because that's where we are with our Melanie.
Yeah.
People now, she's used to walking in the room and being like a superstar. She has her princess wave down, literally her princess wave. And she walks in a room with her little princess wave and everybody looks away. And she doesn't understand, and it's heartbreaking. And so what we want to do is normalize what our lives look like. So for our friends that can't communicate in a way that we're used to communicating, we want to communicate by just showing you how amazing their lives are and make it so that, you've seen us stim so many times, or you've seen this, or you've heard that, and now it's not a new thing, and you are past that, and you can just say hi to all of our friends out there that are living with disabilities.
Oh, it's really special. Yeah, and for them to be able to have that community network too and to feel like they're not alone in whatever it is they're going through, whether they're struggling or whether they're thriving.
Right. And that's exactly the point. I will say that I think a couple of them conned me into allowing them to have a YouTube channel just for them. So we may have a junior ambassador YouTube channel that talks about, I have no idea. It was like Lego minifigures last time I heard, but I think it's coming because they just want a place that they can go online and stream about all of their favorite things. So we'll see.
Yeah, this is all like a dumpster fire waiting to happen.
No, but it's going to be fun. And they have been telling us that they are ready to be famous. So we're going to do it.
Yes, as they should be. And you'll be right there leading the way. Well, we had talked to you at the Military Influencer Conference this fall, and you were able to present a lot of really great things actually happened for you and your organization there. But one of the things that was mentioned a little bit was how Tricare impacts, is it ESM? Am I using the right acronym?
Yep. So we are EFM without the P.
Okay. And it's EFMP is the program. Okay, good. I had that written down and then I started to second guess it when I was mixing up my words. But what are some of the pressing issues military families are facing with Tricare and ESMP that you guys are seeing?
So it's a bit of a dumpster fire because it's here, there's a problem, there's a problem. So recently we changed our pharmacy contract. Everybody's talking about the new Tricare contract in 2025. The reality is we've been in a new pharmacy contract this last year. And there have been a lot of pain points for families. Now we all have to go through Express Scripts or Credo for specialty medication. And our families that are using Medicaid can't use their Medicaid waiver to pay their copays under Express Scripts. So they are being forced to cover copays that they didn't have to cover before when they could go to CVS and pick up those prescriptions. Accredo has long been known in the civilian world to be a struggle for people getting specialty medications. And then you couple that with the fact that we live on military installations that have difficulty getting packages from non-standard shipping companies. Mm-hmm. That has created an even larger problem because a lot of times the medication Accredo sends is not a medication that can be left out for long. So it's overnighted with ice packs, and then you're getting it 4 or 5 days later and you don't know if the medication's good. I think you probably heard everybody talking about a medication called Liv Marley. Mm-hmm. Liv Marley is the only medication that treats a very specific medical condition. A child is born with it. It's a genetic condition. And it came to our attention because we had a little friend who was 18 months old. His dad had joined the military, had joined the Army, because his daughter's best friend in kindergarten in Florida had told them that the Army had this great program called EFMP and that Tricare covered everything. So they joined and they got sent to Fort Cavazos, which is definitely not where they should have been given the little kid's medical background. And Tricare denied the medication because it required that the doctor consider a therapeutic liver transplant prior to approving the medication. And what we're seeing is that sounds outrageous, right? Like, yes. That's outrageous. Yeah. It's because the medication was so expensive. Express Scripts can shift the cost to Tricare to cover the liver transplant, and then they only have to cover the very inexpensive generic anti-rejection drugs that would be required. So they're not looking at it from the whole body. They're just looking at it from the pharmacy benefit. And so that's a struggle. Our families often live a decent distance away from medical facilities, and nobody takes into account, like we talked about, how much it takes them in gas to get there. So Fort McCoy, Wisconsin is 99 miles from the Mayo Clinic. And so they don't even get Tricare Prime Travel, which pays for your gas, your hotel, everything, food for the day you go to your appointment because you have to be 100 miles from your PCM's office. JBLM is another base. It may not be 100 miles, but you're on the road to Seattle for hours every time you have an appointment. And you're paying to park, you're paying for gas, you're paying for food, but you're not reimbursed any of those costs. Mm-hmm. And I think the last big one is our families who are on Tricare Prime Remote. They don't have the ability to use an MTF to get their prescriptions for free. They have to go to the civilian pharmacy. So now all of those medications they were getting for free, they have to pay copays on, and it is hurting a lot of families.
It's really wild how many things fall through the cracks. And even when everything's working perfectly, it seems like there isn't one cure-all. There isn't one thing that works for everyone. And that's got to be such a tricky thing to try to navigate. And you yourself, I mean, you have some pretty great resources. You're so knowledgeable and well-informed in this space. And you guys have faced housing difficulties and challenges. Yeah. So you told me before that you even were homeless for a little bit as you guys were trying to navigate some of these program challenges, right?
Right. So my husband was on orders to the academy. So the Sergeant Major Academy is in El Paso. Mm-hmm. And they gave him orders, and we gave notice on our house. They said it was the service member's choice on whether to take their family or not, knowing there wasn't medical care. We don't get additional money. So if he goes to the academy and we don't go with him, we don't get a second BAH. And so we gave up the house. There were other things going on with the house. Our landlord wasn't paying the mortgage, and he was losing the house to the bank. There was a lot going on. But we gave up the house. We were working with the realtor, and we're like, we'll just go with him to El Paso for a few months over the summer until the realtor can find us a house that we can afford here and also afford my husband somewhere to live in El Paso. And, HRC was telling us, you can go. It's the service member's choice. It's the family's choice. The EFMP director told my husband, if you bring your daughter here, I'll file CPS charges on neglect on you. And so then what do we do? And so we panicked and we made phone calls and we're like, this is outrageous. And they took away my husband's academy slot and said, okay, you're just going to do distance learning. It wasn't a choice anymore. You're going to do distance learning, which means he's in school and doing a job at the same time. But now we've given up our house. And so we didn't have a house to live in. We went to another base where he was going to be working. Now they got us on the wait list. They said, okay, you have like a month and a half until you can have the house. I'm like, great. Guess what, honey? You don't have a job because you're supposed to go to school. So we'll take a month of leave. We'll be fine. We'll take a month of leave. We've never done that his entire career. It was amazing. I recommend it. 10 of 10 for everybody. I recommend it. So if there was There was no government cell phone ringing. There was nobody calling. It was the best silver lining ever. But we came back and then the house we were supposed to had mold in it. And so then they told us we couldn't have the house. And we're like, we've been waiting on this house and it's very difficult to find a house it's not accessible, but it's one story. I don't have to carry our daughter upstairs. And again, my husband's unit had to get involved because housing was like, nope, sorry, you don't have a house. Just go look for one somewhere else. And so he happened to work at the Pentagon at the time, and they made a phone call or we wouldn't have even had our house. And so, yeah, we lived in our camper in the campground at another base nearby for a couple of months while we figured out where we were going to live. Funny enough, I think I did like an ABC interview and they're like, where are you at? Why is it moving behind you? And it was because somebody was walking and the camper was shaking.
Awesome. And this is all while you have a medically complex child, by the way, who has medical equipment that's life-saving, entirely necessary. So God forbid you were to lose power. These are like critical things for you.
Yeah, I mean, that is the reality. So we have a feeding pump for her, and she has a blood pressure machine and a pulse ox machine and oxygen and a ventilator, and we're just kind of like fingers crossed.
Oh my gosh. You guys are the most resilient family, I'll tell you.
One thing that we've always said is that as long as we're together, we'll be okay. And so we always had a rule, nobody stays in the hospital by themselves. Nobody's ever alone because we are stronger together and we can be happy no matter where we are. So we can have Christmas in the hospital, we can have birthdays, in a hotel, but as long as we're together, we'll be okay.
Oh my gosh. Well, you, I think, could enact change wherever you are, but geographically located, you guys are in a great spot to have a big impact on a lot of people and a lot of lives. And what are some legislative things that you're hoping to see that could maybe impact more military families, especially exceptional families in the military? That is a tongue twister.
Isn't it? So we have been working on changes. So we talked about the hearing aids for retiree kids on Tricare Prime. We have Tricare Select up for this year's NDAA. We've been working on exceptions to the policy for the Tricare Prime travel. So if you are on Tricare Select and something goes sideways, right? We are all one accident away from being an EFMP family. So you get in a car accident and now you need to go out of state for medical care. You don't have the Tricare Prime travel benefit. And so we are working on policy through the NDAA to allow exceptions to that policy. For our families at Fort McCoy, that same exception would allow them to get the Tricare Prime travel benefit. We think that's really important because people are avoiding enrolling in Tricare. But if you give them a reason that it's benefiting them instead of all of the things they think is horrible, well, if you enroll in EFMP, you could have the Tricare Prime travel benefit. That means that we're going to be able to better serve our families. We've had some wins that we're trying to get the DoD to implement, specifically DHA. So we are 3 or 4 years out from getting an increase in respite care hours for our families of Tricare Echo. They told us it would take 3 to 5 years to implement. So hopefully any day we get that. We're looking into next year's NDAA, and we're going to be asking our families. We go back to them at the end of the year and say, what do you think is hurting you? One of the things we heard is the quality of life initiatives this year. We've all heard about them. They're amazing, except not a single quality of life change has ever been pinpointed to an EFMP family. So you make childcare changes, but our kids still can't go to the CDCs. And they've made changes for food insecurity and the substance allowance. That being said, we don't take into account the costs that are associated with being an EFMP family. And so our families are food insecure for very different reasons. We're working on an issue close to my heart, which is that when you're on Tricare Echo and you have home health nursing, you are not allowed to be employed or seeking an education. And so that's a retention and readiness issue for our dual service members and our single soldiers. But for people like me, I can volunteer, but I can never take a paycheck because I am not allowed to be employed. And when we talk about all these quality of life issues, wouldn't it make sense for any family to be able to have a second person contribute to the expenses, especially when we know they have additional expenses because they're an EFMP family? So we're trying to circle back to Hawkins-Sask and say, look, EFMP should be a quality of life issue in and of itself because we have problems accessing all of this, but for very different reasons. And so I think that's the way we're going to go. And then we're going to ask families, okay, what else are we missing that you want us to try to get through this year as well?
Yeah, and I think before we get to that, that really needs to be amplified what you just said, because I think for most people who might not understand what that means is all of this work that you're doing through your organization and these advocacy efforts that you're having are unpaid. That's just you volunteering your time, and it's a lot of time and it's a lot of impact, and you should be able to be compensated for all that you're doing. So yeah, it's I think a critical miss. And like you're saying, it really does impact the whole family when you have just one service member who's able to net an income.
Yeah. And I mean, we think about how everybody is talking about how, spouse unemployment, spouse unemployment, spouse unemployment, except in this case, the DHA is literally requiring me to be unemployed because my daughter needs nursing care and she doesn't go to school because of her immune system. So I don't even have the benefit of her going to school like a lot of other families do. I'm just forced to be home with her, which I love, but I'm also forced to not take a paycheck. So, yeah, 60 to 80 hours a week of volunteer time, but I can never be paid for it because I'm not allowed to be employed.
Oh my gosh, it's a travesty. It's even more remarkable. Like, I admire you so much in what you're doing, and that's just another level of that. And one of the things you just mentioned that I wanted to come back to is you said talking to our families and hearing more about the issues that matter to them and what's happening. How are you doing that? How do you stay connected with this community, and how do you really seek out their voices and their opinions?
So we try to do a lot of outreach events anytime we hear anything, going on. I know Operation Homefront is really big right now, right? They're doing all of their Christmas events. So we try to set up a booth at any outreach opportunity we have to bring families in to tell them who we are, tell them about our grant, bring them into our community. And we do a survey annually. So we put that survey out internally within our peer-to-peer support groups, but we also then ask our connections on the outside, okay, share this with all of the families you know because they likely know someone who's in EFMP. And then we take that survey and the things that we hear from families, and that's what we take to Congress. And really, we're hearing in our groups the themes tend to be generalized year to year. And so then we create a survey based off of what we've heard in the groups. And then we leave blank openings for them to be able to put in things that maybe we haven't heard, but maybe there's a base, there's a pocket somewhere where they're experiencing something that nobody else is. So we leave an opening for them to be able to tell us those things too.
Yeah, was there anything that surprised you in what you heard in your most recent survey results?
I wish I could say surprised. I guess I'm not surprised, but I was a bit shocked that the numbers were as high as they were for food and financial insecurity. We knew people were facing it, but I don't think that we realized it was to the extent that it was. And the fact that people were willing to be so candid about it, it's something that in the past it's been shameful, right? We don't want to talk about it. It means that we've done something wrong. And I think that there's proof here that telling people, like, we know this isn't your fault. We know that you didn't get yourself into this predicament. We're so tired of people saying stop buying boats because none of us have a boat. Uh, you know, they're willing to tell us that these are problems. And I guess the other thing that we haven't talked about, but that's really important, is our families who are on the autism care demonstration. We've known for a long time they've been really upset with the changes that were occurring. But it seems like a lot of them have started doing their research. And so one thing we've been talking to the families about is, the demonstration is a research project. It is the largest research project to date on military children without parental consent or even knowledge. So these families, their kids are research subjects and they don't even know it. And we've managed to say, okay, you do your homework. You don't have to take our word for it. Here's all the information on the government websites. What do you think? And those families are saying, okay, hold on a minute. I didn't know this. I have questions. And so they're seeking answers. And I think it means that we're teaching them to advocate for themselves. So that's good news.
Definitely is. And then definitely on the food and financial insecurity angle too. I think that's really intriguing for us at Mission Roll Call because it's something that we've heard from veterans and their families that really matters to them. And we also conduct a lot of polls and surveys to get that voice from veterans directly, that unfiltered, apolitical opinion. And I think this year, that was one of the top four for 2025 priorities is food and financial security. And I think, like you're saying, it is something that's maybe underreported, or it's really easy to kind of turn a blind eye to that because we don't want to think that an active duty service member or a veteran could be struggling financially or with food insecurity. So I think it's interesting, like you said, there is a bit of a different lens for your community because they have all of these other challenges that they have to deal with. And like you're saying, just all these appointments and equipment and things that might not be covered by insurance and now, maybe prescription co-pays. But I don't know, what do you think is an approach for that? Or is it mostly right now just about hearing that information, being able to kind of hold space for that conversation and then trying to just take it one level up? It just seems like a very big issue to tackle.
So one of our goals is to be able to reach commands because a lot of people are afraid to tell their command that there's a problem because there's always blame that you're spending your money wrong. Go see financial readiness, make a budget. But these families have budgets. The reality is you can't make more money appear where it doesn't, it doesn't go into the wrong place. You can't just magicalize more money out of a paycheck than you already have. And so getting commands to be willing to hear the service members when they say, no, my money is budgeted properly. Just our expenses exceed what I'm bringing in. And it's not because I'm spending frivolously. It's because I'm spending $500 on medication copays for real. That's what we pay, $500 a month. It's pretty shocking, right? Yeah. And we're on Tricare Prime. And then they're paying to park. So our children's hospital just increased their parking to $23 a day. So every time they go to a specialty appointment, $23 just to park. They can't make this up. And so getting commands to be willing to hear them and listen to them, I think is really important. So we've been trying to reach out on that side too and say, okay, these are real stories. If they come to you, believe them until there's reason not to, right? If you're going to send them to financial readiness, we went through this, my spouse and I, and then financial readiness is like, you can't, like, this is true, right? There is nothing that you're doing wrong. There's no way to make this better. The reality is the money is allocated appropriately, but there's just not enough of it. And to understand when they say my spouse can't work, that their spouse legitimately may not be able to work. And so trying to open the space for them in commands, as well as opening a space for them in our groups and with the volunteers in our organization to say this is true. And then, there's a lot of pushback as there is for food and financial insecurity. And anyway, when you talk about the government, when we go up to leaders in the DoD and members of Congress, so that's when we take our data with us and we take our stories because data doesn't lie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think, and that's why the programs that you've implemented this year in your new grant program where you're helping to offset some of those additional costs is so impactful. It's just in a perfect world, you wouldn't need to do that. And that would be covered, for everyone. But I'm grateful that it exists and that it's outlined and resourced for those that need it. But goodness, feels like we got to do better as a whole. And I guess that really is, my next question is, how do you think communities or people who might be listening to this could better support exceptional families of the military?
So one, when you work in a food bank or you are anywhere that's giving food to EFMP families, take into account the reality that a lot of them can't use a lot of the standard foods from food banks. So those bags we see at the commissary, a lot of times they have spaghetti and peanut butter. And a lot of our population is going to have celiac disease or allergies. And so how do we create food bags that everybody can utilize? I think is a really important thing because a lot of our civilian members and communities want to help. And that is how a lot of them help, right? You go to a food bank or you get a box at Christmas or all of those things. But what do you do when you bring that box home? And a lot of it you can't use. And so then it's just sitting there. And you want to use it because you know that it would make money go a lot further, but you also know that it'll make someone you love really sick. And so holding that space open for people to tell you what they need or creating specialty items that people can request could be really helpful. Talk to your community, talk to your local organizations. We surely should not be the only people who are saying we'll help you waive your parking garage fees, we'll help you with gas. The reality is if you're by a hospital that's charging parking, work with the hospital. If you know anybody who works at the hospital or you want to advocate, tell them they need to create programs so that people can have waivers to this because it is very scary to take your kiddo or your spouse into an ER because they desperately need to be seen, but be worried that you're not going to have enough money on your debit card to get your car out of the garage. Then how do you get home? Speak from experience. My spouse, when he first joined, we struggled with my card has no money on it. What do I do? How do I get out of here? And so it's embarrassing as if you were in the checkout line trying to buy food, right? And your card gets declined. Now you're holding up all the traffic in the parking garage and everybody's honking at you and you're already frazzled. So talk to the people you know, see if there can be waiver programs for that and support us and our asks in the DoD. Call your congressman if it's something that you're interested in and tell them, these things shouldn't be happening to military families. I want to point out too that we serve veteran families. So retirees, veterans, if you use Tricare, you are us is what we normally say. And so we give this grant to everybody, but there are people that we can't fund. And so we can't fund them because they're outside of our mission, but they need help too.
Right. Yeah, and I think you mentioned this earlier in the call, but I think it's important mentioning again is conversely, what advice would you give to families who are maybe experiencing some challenges or considering entering the ESMP?
So if you think it's going to ruin your career, you're wrong, right? It's going to make it harder. Yeah. Are mistakes going to be made? Yes. Are you probably not going to be able to go overseas? Yes. But you don't want to be in a place where medical care is unavailable. I've been there. I've been there because the military made mistakes and I almost lost my daughter. So everybody who thinks that lying and not saying that there's a medical condition and you'll be fine when you go to Germany or Japan or Korea or any of these great places, you don't know that. And the reality is something could go catastrophically wrong and you will blame yourself because we blamed ourselves for not fighting harder. So let our failure be your lesson that it is not something you want to do. If you don't want to join because you're a special operations family, we get it. We hear that a lot, that you're very, very worried about that. You do have people within your command who can help you, and it is safe to join. Just reach out to the people in Special Operations Command who can help walk you through the process to make sure that everything is done in a way that means that your spouse can still do their job.
Yeah, these seem like basic things, but it's all when you're overwhelmed and when you don't know where to turn, nothing's basic. And everything, like we've said, has some layer of challenge added to it. And I think anything can be a roadblock when you're dealing with a lot and you have a lot on your plates.
Yeah, it can be hard. One thing I will say is that if you get a brand new diagnosis and you don't know what to do, find somebody else who's been through it. They can handhold you, right? So many of us have been through so much that we just want to give back. So you get a new diagnosis, you don't know what to do, find somebody, go online, Google, reach out in spouses groups, post an anonymous post somewhere, find somebody who's been through it, if it's their own diagnosis or their child's diagnosis, because it'll make your life a lot easier.
I do think that's one of the really special things about the military community, and I've seen that personally being in a military family, and my brothers are both active duty, is their neighbors, their friends are really there for them, and when they go through a difficult time, there's a lot of community support. And I think it's really special to be able to have that network. So if you have a child that has a rare disease or has maybe a complex medical condition, it can feel so isolating. So being able to connect with others and to feel like you're not alone and there's resources available to you, like you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the most important part, right? Is staying part of the community, and it can be hard and it can be isolating, and you'll realize you're not the best friend that you used to be. You're not a great friend, but you're the friend that you can be. And if people love you, that will be enough.
hmm And you shared a lot of impactful stories already during this conversation. Your families, of course, and then Alyssa, just some other names that have popped up. But are there any stories or maybe moments that have happened in your advocacy work that really stand out or maybe that surprised you in some way?
So we like to joke that Melanie is the reason the ACA didn't get repealed because back when they were trying to do it, the day that John McCain did his thumbs down, we ran into him in the hallway and he stopped and we have pictures with him. And, he'd already had his diagnosis at this point, and he just said to us, I'm going to pray for her tonight. He didn't even care about himself. He just said, I'm going to pray for her tonight. And then a couple hours later, we all watched him on the floor give that thumbs down, that last vote he did. And so, we joke amongst our family and friends that Melanie saved the ACA. Um, I'm sure that's outlive her. And, I think the other thing that really stands out is that I tell my husband all the time, not a celebrity, but when I run into families and people know me, it's always shocking. I gotta tell you, Britt, it's always shocking. The number of times I've introduced myself to people and they're like, I know who you are, Ross. It's stalking every single time, but in a really good way because I feel like I do things quietly, right? I feel like I'm just trying to do things for families because that's what needs to be done. So when somebody recognizes us, it's a little daunting. Like, oh, wait, now I don't know what to do with myself because I was just going to give you a spiel. And I guess the last thing I learned is that I'm never going to be as cool as Melanie. We walk into rooms without her, much like we started this call, and they're like, "Where's Melanie? Where's Melanie?" So yeah, someday I need a fan club as big as hers because every room we walk into, people ask where she is, and now since she's 12 and she's too grown for this, I get a lot of disappointing looks. So maybe I'll be as cool as her someday.
I don't want you to get your hopes up. I'm just saying I personally witnessed that in that giant ballroom we were in at the Military Influence Conference, and you were on stage. You were in a prime position, and everyone was still looking at Melanie, who was off on the side. Actually, I think she was watching her iPad. She was like, "This is another day for my mom, another day for me." She looked beautiful in her dress, but yeah, she was the star of the show, even though you were in the spotlight that day. And that's yeah.
That's every day, but we do it for her. So it's worth it. I love it. And so I guess, yeah, I wish I could be as cool as her. Remember that when you meet us, to look at her, to say hi, because she can be heartbroken now that people are starting to look away. And she's mean, but just take the meanness like any other preteen girl who like thinks that you're not cool and go with it.
Oh, I can't imagine ignoring Melanie. That's just so sad. There's no world where that should happen. If she's waving high, you better be waving high back. That should be our next thing we take to little lobbyists.
Yes, I think people just don't know what to do, right? We've all been told don't stare. Don't stare is turned into if I don't look, I'm not staring. That's not the answer either. So come say hi. Please, please, please come say hi. She loves people until she doesn't. We never know when those days are going to be, but you tried, and we are not going to be upset with you if she's like, not today.
If she closes her eyes and lays down, yeah, so she doesn't have to communicate with you, then you'll know. But at least you still made the effort, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, look, we literally were at the White House one day and we ran into the Secretary of the Navy and he comes running for her, like running for her. He's like, I've been looking everywhere for you. And he like bent down to say hi to her and she's like, ugh, like mortified mom moment. And he goes, do you like coins? And pulled a coin out of his pocket. And she's like, yeah, say meow. So even the Secretary of the Navy got told like, no. It is what it is. Like I said, some days she's on, some days she's not. Bring a challenge coin with you. It's guaranteed she'll love you.
I'm going to have that in my pocket next time I'm in the DC area. None of us are immune. I think that's really the last thing I want to end with is how can our listeners get involved or maybe help support or even learn more about your work and the organization that you volunteer so many hours with?
So you can find us online, Exceptional Families of the Military. So I believe it's exceptionalmilitaryfam.com. You'll find us on all the social medias. If you can't remember that, look up my name. Literally, there's only one me, which is not always a good thing because first impressions are always first impressions for me. But the good news is if you find me, all of my social media profiles link back to the organization. So if you can't remember it, you see my name down there. Find me, you'll find the organization. All of our programming, everything is listed on our website. And you can reach out to us on any of our social media channels as well.
Perfect. Well, we are so excited to keep following along, and I'll try not to literally be following you everywhere you are. But I'm just so impressed by you, Austin, and your family, and just all the impact that you're having in the advocacy work that you're doing. And to reiterate again, for free. So it's extra remarkable what you've accomplished. So thank you so much for sharing more with us, for impacting so many military families. And we're just really grateful to know you and to hopefully be able to work with Melanie more.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And for everyone listening or watching this, thanks so much for tuning in to the Lasting Mission podcast. Be sure to check back for more episodes in the future. As always, you can stay up to date and in the know on everything that's happening with Mission Roll Call at missionrollcall.org.